Hello. In this lesson, we're going to look at the Gumball Manipulator. Now, Gumball is a new feature within Rhino 5, and what it allows you to do is to take your selected object and translate it in various ways. And let me show you what I mean. If we select this curve shape that I've drawn, you can see we get the normal highlighted mode. If I come down here and click on Gumball, right on the lower bar there, we have some new icons showing up. When I deselect the object, they disappear again. So let me select it, and I'll explain to you what these icons mean. The arrows allow you to move or translate whatever's selected in either the Z, the X, or the Y axes. These arced objects allow you to rotate again around the Z, around the X, and around the Y. And this red and this green square, these allow you to scale the object. Now, this is a planar curve, so it's a two-dimensional object. If this was a three-dimensional object like a sphere or a cube, you'd also see a blue square, which would allow you to scale the object in the Z direction. This icon represents the construction plane that's currently active. And this icon, if I click on it, I have some different options for how Gumball works, but we'll get to those in a little while. So let's take a look at Gumball in action. So if I take my curve, if I just drag on the blue arrow, you can see I can now translate my curve up in space. Do Control Z to undo that. If I want to move it in the X direction, I just drag the red arrow. And if I want to move it in the Y direction, I'll just drag the green arrow. I can also click right in the center and just move it around anywhere like normal. Let me undo that. Now if I click on one of these arcs and move it, you see I can rotate the object along that particular axis. So I can kind of keep adding moves and combining moves until I really place the object exactly where I want it in space. Do some undos and get that back to where we were. I can also scale an object. I can click on this square here and start scaling. And that's going to scale it in one dimension. Let me undo that. Or if I grab this green square and scale it, that's going to allow me to scale in the Y direction. If I grab either one of these icons and start dragging it and then hold down Shift, it's now going to proportionally scale the object. And I can scale down or scale up whether I'm holding down the Shift key or not. So you see, with Gumball, we can interactively drag our object around and position it. We can also position it accurately using numerical inputs. So if I just click once on the blue arrow, it knows that I want to move the object in the Z direction, and it just waits for me to type a value. And let's put a 15 in there. So you can see that moves that up 15 places in the air. Undo to get that back on the ground. Or transversely, if I want to move that down, I could type a negative 15. Now you can see that we're under the ground plane. And this works for scale. Let me click on that. Let's say I want to scale this to 90% of where it was. I can click on this, type a 0.9, and that scales that in. I'll undo this. Or if I hold down Shift, then click on the icon, type a 0.9, it knows I want to proportionately scale the object. So when I hit Enter, it's now moved the X and the Y axis in 90%. Let's undo that. And this works for angles as well. I can click on that object, type 45, and it's going to rotate that 45 degrees. So as you can see, Gumball is a pretty powerful little tool that'll save you some time. Let's say I wanted to rotate an object without Gumball, so let me switch Gumball off. I would have to come over here, select Rotate, choose the center of rotation, choose an angle, and move the object like that. Whereas with Gumball, I can just switch that on, click there, type 45, and we're done. But the real power of the Gumball Manipulator is the part I'll show you next. The really powerful part of this command is how it lets us build three-dimensional objects from within this command. So I have my rounded rectangle here, so if I just start dragging this curve up by the blue arrow and then press and hold down the Control key, you see that small grayed out vertical line appear. And this lets me know that I'm actually extruding this shape now. So when I release this, we now have an extruded shape. Let me switch to shaded view to show you that. So as you can see, we've now extruded this elliptical form. And I click back on Gumball, and I still have all the options. I can rotate this object in space. And I can scale it. do all the other things I can. Let me undo and get us back to where we were. But if I hold down Control and Shift and click on this top part, we now have some other options. I can keep on adding to the height of this. So I can extrude this up or shrink it back down. And we get back where we were here. And again, I'll Control Shift on the top surface. This time I'm going to drag the scale command. So I'll start dragging that, and then I'll hold down Shift once I start dragging it, and then I'll release. Now you can see what we've done. We've actually scaled this upper section, and we've changed the shape of this object. So now we've added this draft angle. If I Shift click again, I'll start dragging up the top surface. I'll hold down Control again, and you see that faint gray line on the front side there. Change from an angled shape to this vertical shape. And if I release the mouse, you can see I've now added this vertical section. If I click on the object, and let me switch that to wireframe, you can look inside the object. You can see this is one part. So we don't have two pieces just touching one another. This is actually Boolean the object together while it created it. And then we hit Control-Alt-S to reshade that. And we can kind of keep working from there. Let's say I want to put a small lip on this. I'll Control-Shift, click on the top surface. I'll start dragging this in again, hold down Shift. And this time, I'm just going to tap the Alt key. Now I'm continuing to hold down the Shift key, and I'll just tap Alt. And as soon as I get that plus sign, you can see this new line shows. Now at the moment, this is still a separate surface from this object, but I've created a planar surface that's an exact scaled down match for this surface. So if I drag this up, hold down Control, it now creates another little stepped area. Now this is a separate piece from this part, so I can take these two, and I'll do a Boolean union on these. I'll click this icon here. Now if I click them, you can see they're one part. I'll Control-Shift click again on this upper surface, and I'm going to scale this back, holding down Shift. So you can see I've made another drafted shape, but this time, while this is highlighted, I'm just going to drag this back down into itself. And you can see now we're starting to add a cutout into this object. That's a very powerful, very fast way. Typically you'd have to make a shape that matched this and do a Boolean out of the top surface, but now we can just interactively drag things. And we can drag more than one surface at a time. If I Control-Shift click on this surface and this surface, they're both highlighted, and I can drag them up. And it continues to update the surfaces. Or I can just Control-Shift this, and I can adjust how deep the cut is. Or I Control-Shift this, and I can readjust that relationship between those two objects. I can also still use the Rotate command. So let me Control-Shift click this surface and this surface. Let me get a little bit better view here. This time I'm just going to interactively drag this red object. And you can see I get a slight faint view of what's happening. And when I release that, you can see my objects have changed, and now they've rotated along the x-axis, and my poly surface has updated itself. But let's notice one thing here. If I reselect this surface, as you'll see, the blue arrow is still lining up perpendicular to the construction plane. We can go ahead and change that. And the way we do that is by finding the little white circle, and we'll click on that. And the Gumball preferences are currently set to Align to C-plane. We can switch this to Align to Objects. And there you see the arrow has now changed directions. So now when I click on these two, I'm no longer moving them vertically, I'm moving them in the orientation they currently are. And I can still kind of keep moving those surfaces too, and really change how this thing looks. You can see I've gone a little far here, so the surface is actually pushing out. Let me go ahead and undo that. I'll Control-Shift this surface. We're still lining up normal to the new surface, and I can go ahead and actually change this angle that's sitting in here. So now we can move that and manipulate this angle. We can also change this angle. So you can see we can get some very complex shapes happening here. And I can do the same thing down at the bottom here. Change the angle on this part. And really start just distorting the shape like crazy. Let me undo that one. Let's say I wanted to add a ridge onto this surface here, because we don't want this sharp corner. So what I'll do is Control-Shift-Click this surface. I'll start dragging it down, and then I'll hold Control. And now we've added a lip onto this surface. Let's say I want to move that down but be very accurate about how far it goes. If I undo this and come back and click on the object again, I start to drag, and holding down the mouse button, I'll type a 3 and hit Enter. And now I'm constrained to just moves of 3. You can see I can go up 3 or I can go down 3. And if I hold Control, now it's going to manipulate me to a vertical move of 3 millimeters. So now we know that this lip is 3 millimeters. And from there, I can shift-click this object, and I can drag that in like we did before. We can change the shape, and we can just kind of keep building from there. So Gumball is a very powerful new command within Rhino 5, but it does require a little bit of a different mindset to how you might be used to working. But once you get used to working with it, you'll find it's a very valuable new command, and it's really going to save you a lot of time. And that concludes our look at the Gumball Manipulator.